with folks.
Sure.
I also created a little Google form or document within that folder that Ryan had made that we can take some notes today if there's anything of consequence that comes of our meeting.
Yes,
So,
I noticed that. Excellent.
yeah, maybe we'll wait one more minute here to see if Denise shows up before we move forward. So, let's see. I don't know. I'll just give you a highlight of what's been going on with me in the last week because it's significant. We had a little going away party last night for our youngest son and his family. They're moving from Oregon to South Carolina. And he's already been there about a month, starting a new job. And so he came back to pick up his family. He's got 2 kids under the age of 5, and they just relocated.
Where in South Carolina, Scott?
Near Charlotte, North Carolina. It's a town called Fort Mill. He's actually working for a company that owns a paper mill there. And I guess Fort Mill is a town of maybe about 60,000 people. And I guess Charlotte, which I've never been to, is a metropolitan area of about 3 million people.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to going to visit because I hear it's a very beautiful area.
Yes. I lived in South Carolina for about 3 years, but we were more in the Charleston area.
Okay. Is that on the coast?
Yes.
Okay. Well, what was that like?
It was good.
Yeah.
It was very different given that I'm from the islands. So, you know, the Spanish moss on the trees and all of that was pretty.
Okay. Well, I've heard the beaches are pretty, you know, white sand. And, you know, here in Oregon, we're more used to the rocky, kind of gravelly type beaches, but kind of dismal, gray, misty type beaches. So maybe one of you can share some little tidbit here.
A little tidbit about
whatever comes to mind.
Well, it's funny when you were talking about the size of the town and Charlotte and what have you. The scale in Canada can be quite different. So I grew up in a village of 400 people.
Oh.
And I now live in a smaller community than that, of about maybe 30 people. And it doesn't even qualify as a village. And the town where I work is about 6,000 people total. That includes about 2,000 students.
At your institution?
At the university here.
So are you saying when those students leave to go back home, then your town population shrinks by a third?
Dramatically so, yeah. Some businesses for the summer even close down because the students aren't here. So, yeah, it's interesting for sure.
Wow, when you went to Las Vegas for that conference we were at then, that was like huge, huh?
Yeah, I'm not much of a city person either, but yeah, the largest, there's a city about 2.5 hour drive from Halifax, which is about 300,000. And that's the largest in the region. That's as big as it gets. Okay. Then we're talking Montreal, which is about a 12, 13 hour drive, or a flight, of course. So yeah, it's pretty rural where I am. That's for sure.
Sounds it. Yeah. Now, what about you, Rhonda? How big is your town, your community?
Well, we are a college town too, so in terms of the numbers, I really can't tell you. I've been basically burying my head in the sand quite a bit because I am in full mode with my dissertation work. Getting my review together to send to my chair, in addition to juggling full-time work and being a parent. It's fun stuff.
Yeah.
Denise has joined us.
Hello.
Hi, Denise.
Hi. You won't see me. I'm still in my pre-going to
Okay, so you're not going to reveal yourself,
You
huh?
won't see my beautiful face today. I'm sorry.
That's fine. We were just kind of getting reacquainted a bit in hopes that you would come on because you are the fourth person that said for sure you'd be here today.
Sorry, I didn't know we were on Zoom.
Oh, well, we are, but we can hear you just fine.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
Okay. So I am recording this for the benefit of those that might want to see, but at the same time, we can also summarize any notes that we think might be useful as we go forward. So the purpose of our meeting is just to maybe get reacquainted about what our interest in empathy is. And there were some ideas that were going back and forth on email. I also was reminded that the conference that we met at was the e-learning conference that was in Las Vegas. And so all of us had some interest or connection to e-learning in addition to empathy. So I suppose that's probably, well, it doesn't have to be the focus of what we do. In fact, what we can do together is just be supportive of one another. We don't actually have to work on the same project together, but I just had such a good time interacting with you folks when we met around the table there that I was pleased that some of you wanted to keep staying connected. So maybe that's something we can talk about today. Is there common ground to work together? Is there an opportunity just to touch base with the work we're doing and see how we can support one another? Or and
I think we're losing Denise or something's happening.
Sorry?
As well.
Yeah.
Hello?
We're
Hello.
getting some feedback from you, Denise. I don't know. Are you okay on that end?
Yeah. I'm okay. What was I gonna say? I think we should try to work together if it's ever possible. I think multi-university study would be very interesting. I mentioned in the correspondence earlier that I just finished this group HATE, which is the aversion to group learning or group work in classrooms. And we did it at the College of Hospitality, and we had quite a large data size. And one of the things that come out really is that despite the fact that we're number one when it comes to diversity, I mean, our university and the university, Rutgers University in America, we really don't do anything when it comes to teaching our students diversity or diversity and inclusion. So I actually approached my dean and I asked him, is there anything we do that enables our students to learn how to deal with all these diverse cultures around them? And he said, no, we don't. So I took it one step further because I'm doing a grant writing course this semester. And I asked him if he could apply for this. There's this Center for International Business. So he's quite keen on that. But I think that's the major issue. We teach more the cognitive knowledge in our classrooms, but we never really teach really necessary for today's global world, right? We don't teach diversity. We don't teach how to deal with diversity. We don't teach empathy, which I think is the basis of inclusive behavior. So if we actually test that across our schools, it would be a quite meaningful collaborative experience that would take it to the next step of probably creating more and more diversity centers across America. And nowadays, of course, with all the political hoo-ha, it's a crucial issue, right? That's what I think.
Okay, well, that's good. Maybe, Denise, you've kind of set a nice stage for us that instead of maybe reacting to you, we can just kind of go around the horn here and let the other colleagues respond to maybe what they're thinking about, and then we can come back and kind of review each idea. I mean, I think your idea has great merit and I think potential as well. What about you, Rhonda? I know that you and Amber were particularly interested in preparing your instructors, I think, or working with people who were doing online work that didn't really have a clue as to how to work with students, I think. Wasn't that one of your main interests?
Right. So that was Amber's, that was her line of inquiry. Actually, what I'm working on specifically, and it relates to my dissertation work, is empathy, but within using games to promote empathic responses. So I am working with one particular component of empathy being perspective taking. And we have a game that was designed on campus with one of our liberal arts courses, which is a women and gender studies course. And it is specifically content driven to be able to show students the different resources that are available for women out there. Now, it is a game. It's kind of patterned. I don't know if you all are familiar with Spent. Spent was another game that was used to educate the population about poverty and resources for people who are underprivileged. And it was meant to engender an empathic response. So my research is looking into the different ways that we can do that within a game and implementing those elements. So things like music, things like narrative within the game itself, and then hopefully delivering that and testing to see if there has been any changes from the prototype, which does not have those elements, and the real thing, the improved version. So that's where I'm more in my headspace is when it comes to empathy. A major thing for me as well is the fact that there are these games for social change and games that teach morality and the different aspects, again, of empathy. But what I've found is that the content area is not there with games as the instrument, plus empathy. So you would have a game that teaches specifically those components, but then when you look at the overburdened school day, you know, if you're looking at K-12 or higher ed, teachers just don't have time to say, I'm going to let my kids play this game to specifically teach them about empathy, right? But if you give them a game that teaches math, teaches something that links to their core curriculum, but has these elements incorporated, it's basically you're accomplishing more than one thing at the same time. And that's where I'm headed in terms of what I'm doing.
Okay. Thank you, Rhonda. I have particular interest in that, and I'll come back to it when I have my turn. How about you, Tony?
So I'm doing something slightly different. The whole idea, though, is relatively new to me, although I have presented on a couple of occasions at conferences. I did a conference presentation a couple of years ago on the feminist classroom, and I presented a couple of times, once at a national conference here in Canada on the compassionate classroom, and I'm actually repeating that. I've been invited out west in a few weeks to repeat that workshop, but not so much about empathy per se. I mean, I know these are can certainly overlap, and I wanted to pursue that a bit farther, because part of this is also integrated into my teaching philosophy. And so I sort of had in mind, hey, maybe we could all work together on, on something that much the way that Denise was talking about it. And so, I teach in post-secondary. Rhonda, you're doing your research is in K-12. Do you also teach there?
So it's on both, basically. I'm in the higher ed space right now. I have like over 10 years in K-12, but I am not faculty. I'm an instructional designer at our university. So that's,
yeah. So, so I was just thinking about how do we, and then also maybe, I don't know how we want to tie this, or even if we do want to tie this to e-learning specifically, because that was, as Scott mentioned, the context under which we met. But I just think that there's something we can leverage here. There's something we can work together on in terms of how do we all get to this empathetic, inclusive, compassionate space and place and how do we not only how do we make that happen in our own teaching in classrooms, but also do we do some research on this, right? So it would be fantastic, I think, for the four of us and others, if they're interested in collaborating on something, a small research project. It doesn't have to be overwhelming. I just think that would be really interesting to do.
You can see me smiling now, right?
Excellent.
Well, yeah, I'm trying to hurry ahead and make some connections here. Maybe I should just kind of review what my interest is. So I as I started to investigate empathy, I realized that there was a kind of the cognitive component and the affective component. And I also had some kind of ahas in my own practice that Rhonda identified, which is if I am constrained by content, where do I fit in exercises to help my students become more compassionate or more empathetic? And essentially working in a doctoral program that has no alignment to kind of a national standard like our teaching programs do, no alignment to a general ed component. We have a program in educational leadership that does have a core curriculum, but several of the courses I teach are, I have the freedom to design the curriculum and the standards, the objectives based on my own sense of what is needed. You know, I'm not beholden to external standards. So I decided 2 summers ago to emphasize the fact that in a course on equity and inclusion that I was going to emphasize fostering empathy, because I thought the missing component for many of our educators was not the head knowledge about the reasons why being inclusive in the classroom was important or attending to diversity in the classroom was important, but I wanted to touch them in more of an emotional way that they could kind of get the aha. Now I know what it feels like to be pushed out of the classroom because I don't have access to resources or because people are making assumptions about me because of the color of my skin. And I found through the use of a game, I think I may have mentioned this in the roundtable, that the game was highly effective. And I developed the game and it was based on the content of the course. And I think that's part of maybe the way that I'm looking forward is the combination of using existing content, but shaping a game that fosters the development of the competence and the content, but at the same time allows people to have an experience of being immersed or engaged enough that it's more than just, I can do a problem now or answer a question, but actually putting myself into the place of another person or another perspective. So that's kind of where I'm at. I've been working on this face-to-face board game that's taking some iterations now, and I am now, you might say, pilot testing, alpha testing, and getting ready to beta test the game in Second Life, which gives me a lot of flexibility about how that game is constructed because I have to build the whole thing myself. So that's where I'm at. I don't know how the four of us and the others can find common ground here about one project, but I'm really intrigued with the notion of trying to find something at different institutions, that we can do some work together. And maybe not all 6 or 7 of us can, but maybe we can. Obviously, maybe, let's see, Rhonda, you need to finish a dissertation. And Denise, are you currently also?
Yeah, I'm due to graduate by the end of this year. I'm currently also writing my dissertation, but this is totally a different topic. It's women executive leadership.
Well, I imagine the practical concerns of being successful on getting through a dissertation have to take precedence in your life. I would hope.
No, yeah, it's good. It's okay. It's like I've done all my coursework, so it's like now I'm really very much into the research, and I have like 3 different researchers running. It's fun. So yeah,
Okay.
I'm good.
All right. Good. Great. And I know Ryan was in a similar place. In fact, when I did some private correspondence with him over the Christmas break, he was immersed in dissertation work and also with doing some home remodeling or something. So he's, very, very busy trying to get through his program as well. So anyway, that's, I guess, kind of the landscape. Did anyone get a clue as to where there might be, an opportunity? I suggested in the last email I sent out that maybe we can look at doing another kind of a presentation at the conference in New Orleans in the fall. If any of you are planning on going there, we certainly have time to put something together. That might be the impetus to work on something now together. But I guess if it's okay. If it's also an e-learning conference, then we have to at least do a proposal that will attract, that audience. So there has to be some connection to e-learning there. So Tony, you are also dissertating. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I'm afraid so. I did a program at University of Sherbrooke in a PhD program in teaching innovation and pedagogy, and now I'm doing a PhD program at University of New Brunswick in sociology of the body. So,
wow. Double doctor. I don't know. It's like if we're going to look at it from an e-learning perspective, then maybe a game would be ideal. And there's also a possibility that instead of the students, we look at the game teaching professors or educators at all different levels to develop emphatic behavior and, imbue that in the classroom.
I love that idea, Denise. I very much love it because, again, I think that if we can influence educators, I think it does have impact, whether it's K-12 or higher ed. And so, yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah, I did a lot of courses in EDW and the College of Education, so I'm sure they will allow some form of whatever research study done to a lot of the teachers who are learning their masters or doing certifications are K-12 at UNLV, so K-12 instructors or professors, teachers.
Okay.
So what I'm saying is I'm flexible. You know what I'm saying? It's like whatever direction you guys think. But I really think that we should do something to make this whole collaboration sort of like impactful, right?
Yes, I agree. Well, the nice thing about a game is it would fall under the heading of innovation, which would probably also allow us into a conference like EdMedia or e-learning, even if it wasn't directly related to e-learning. I think they have a strand for games and simulations. What do you think, Tony? You think developing a game for faculty to change their thinking and behavior might be an approach here?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'm thinking of it in terms of, I guess I was thinking of it mostly in terms of students. But of course, clearly faculty also have to develop these skills, for lack of a better word, and as you were describing it earlier, this knowledge. I'm hesitating only because I kind of feel a little bit outside of my realm or comfort zone when it comes to games. I've not developed a game, but I'm happy to leverage whatever other people are using in terms of doing the actual research. So if we develop or continue to deploy a game and use it as an instructional tool to elicit and to develop empathy, then yeah, I'm sure I can figure out a way to work that into what I'm doing.
Okay, well, maybe you could also serve as a guide for methodology in a research study.
Yeah.
Uh, And by the way, before I get to you, Rhonda, I wanted to say that one of the things that Ryan contributed to my learning was the use of the IRI, which was this instrument developed by Davis in the early 80s. And it's the Interpersonal Reactivity Index, which is a measure of empathy. And I think it's like a 28-item scale that has 4 subscales. It's been used in scores, if not hundreds, of research studies over the last 30 years. And I am actually piloting a study with teacher education candidates right now in my institution with using the IRI as a pre and a post test by giving them this treatment, if you will, of playing this game to see if their empathy changes over the course of a semester. And I have no idea, you know, it's just kind of a hastily put together piece. My research is tending more and more towards more of a qualitative bent where I really want to find out what's going on inside of people because that really fascinates me. And I just think it's, you know, the way to go for me. But at the same time, you know, using a well validated and reliable instrument is something that we could certainly use as well, you know, across institutions and populations. So, Rhonda, why don't you talk about game development for faculty, you know, game use for faculty development? What do you think about that?
That it's a huge undertaking. Well, you said you had developed a game already, so you know that it does require quite a bit if you're looking at developing a prototype itself. I do like the idea. I think that the scope is huge, which means that in little bits towards that final goal are that's fodder basically for getting our research out there at conferences at the different stop points. I like that you talked about the IRI scale. If we're looking at games as that instrument, then I would also suggest as part of the qualitative piece doing things like think alouds. When somebody is playing, they're also talking through their gameplay as part of the data collection piece. There was something else I was going to say. Oh, some of my research also looked at brain scans, fMRIs, and that's something I'm trying to get some footway in here at our campus, is getting access to one of our labs to be able to look at testing like that, because supposedly there are areas in your brain that light up when you're engaged in an empathetic response. So there is some of that hard data with those fMRIs. So in terms of the measurement, those were some of the things that came up with my literature. The scales, which you mentioned, the pre and post testing, which it self-reports, and then again, having somebody play and talk about what they're experiencing while they play, and of course those scans. Like Tony had said, our focus was more on our students, but I'm game for anything, basically. So whatever we come up with, I'm willing to work with the group in whatever direction.
Well, okay, then I think could you, Rhonda, go on to that Google Doc if you're there and type in that last little bit about the think aloud as a, and then you mentioned, was it the FRMI? Yeah.
Yes, the fMRIs.
Okay, Denise, you've heard your colleagues. What you want to jump back in? Then you introduce this original idea. Maybe talk about what a next step, or maybe just your thoughts now.
My thoughts are, if there is an existing game that we could test, would probably be a good preliminary research before we get into creating another game. You know what I'm saying? I mean, and I'm saying this because I'm probably not an expert in gaming or creating games. And I think the initial question would be why there's so many other games out there, right? I mean, why can't you use any of them? So if we're going to test it utilizing the IRI or having think aloud concepts for the teachers while they're doing the game or fMRI, then yeah, I would recommend we use an existing game, whether it's your game, Dr. Headley, and try it out, you know, before we can say, okay, this is where the weaknesses are. And it could be a multi-game test, not just one test to see its validity on a pre-test, post-test, Solomon 4, whatever design. And then say, okay, now we know the weaknesses of all these games, we're going to create our game. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's,
Right.
yeah. If you can give me 3 minutes, I'll explain what my game is, and maybe you can say, oh, that sounds interesting. Maybe we ought to try to do that or not. This game was designed for educators. So most of my students are teachers and administrators in K-12 schools. Some of them are professors and administrators in higher ed. And the course that they were taking was an equity and justice course that was around how do we ensure equitable access to education for all students. And there was also an ethical component in the course of looking at some of the ethical theories and, you know, how you make decisions based on an ethical framework. And as I said before, my concern was all of my students have had multiple workshops, faculty developments on this content. And what I wanted to do is get them to take the perspective of some of the marginalized students in their classroom. So the purpose of my game was everyone before they showed up had to develop a character based on a framework that I gave them. The framework simply had an age, a gender, maybe a disabling condition, an ethnic background, a financial situation, and they then had to build a backstory for that character, and it took them about a week to build the backstory. They had to develop a trading card that had a photograph or a picture of the student, and when they showed up to play the game, they then had to be that character. So the game had a combination of role play of the character. The game had life situations they had to work themselves through in a little town called Rockville. And the object of the game was to win a scholarship for life. So if they got to the end and were successful, they then would have all their educational expenses paid for the rest of their life. So some of the course content was woven into the game because what they had to do was answer questions that was based on some of the content that they had read in the text and discussed. Some of it was just circumstances like,
Sorry.
You know, like for instance, anyone that was from a very poor background had to ride the bus home. They didn't have people picking them up after school, which meant they got left behind, you know, and other people got to move ahead. There was a hate rally that came to town, and anyone of a particular category got essentially lost a turn, you know, because they weren't liked by this hate group. There were some group exercises where they had to work together on content, like create what I would call like a comprehensive exam question and throw it out to the other group, and then they had conversation around that. The thing that really, really surprised me about this was my students really got into character very well. They became very sad when their character did not win. I won't go into any more detail about the game, but it really struck me about how just assuming the role of that character really caused them to then reflect a lot about both their privilege, you know, as white middle class people, but also said, wow, I never really experienced this kind of thing before, you know, like being left behind or having something denied to you just because of who you were. and I realized that it was a very powerful medium. And anyway, I'm kind of redoing the game a little bit now with this next group to make it a little bit different. But that's kind of the framework. You know, at the very end, there can be one or two winners, and like the finalists have to give a speech about why they're deserving of the scholarship, and then all the other players who didn't get to the end have to now become a scholarship committee and decide who wins and who doesn't win. And that was also a very powerful experience for the students because they had to use ethical theory to defend their decision making. And they were quite, you know, there was a lot of emotion there, which surprised me. But now as I think back, I realize that emotion is a very powerful tool for learning. And I'm now thinking that helping people to take perspective and then feel what it's like to be another person is an important component of this game. That's kind of it in a nutshell.
I have some questions.
Yeah.
Yeah. This game was created as part of a course, right? I mean, a particular course.
Yes.
Is there any way that certain aspects of the game can be extrapolated, that it becomes more of a real focus only into developing empathy?
Yeah, I believe so. I think the real key to that is what I would call the pre-preparation for the game, which is to have these character sketches created and then have the people develop their character so they really understand that person and can then live that person's life through the life of the game.
Mm. And then when they create the backstory, they come with a photograph, you were saying?
Yes. I mean, it's a photograph they get off the web, or they do a drawing, or I can, the next time we meet, I can share examples, or I can even put some in the Google folder so you can look at what these cards looked like. Go ahead, Denise.
Sorry, I was just wondering, because this is an online game, right? So to sort of upgrade, we can create some sort of avatars that they get to either choose or become, right? Because
in fact, yes, the game was originally developed as a board game where they had these playing cards, but now as I'm moving it into the online environment in Second Life, we have created pre-made avatars so that the players didn't have to create that, because if you've not been in Second Life, it takes a little bit to learn how to operate in that medium and then create the avatar. But ultimately, creating the avatar and dressing them true to life to the character could be, I think, a really important aspect of this game.
My third question was, of course, the game, they played the game as the entire semester work, right? Apart from additional lectures.
Well, this game is taught in a 4-week summer semester, and the actual first week is done in preparation. The second week, they actually only play the game for one session, and then we debrief. And the debriefing is a very powerful experience. And we do, and in fact, I had them also do what I call the game development journal, where we used a Google document where everyone recorded their thoughts. And in fact, I went through IRB here and used that journal then as a data source that we used to report in an article that was published a couple of years ago. But see, the exit, they only played my game one day, but the major assignment they did for the course was they got into game development groups. I gave them some simple tools about how you develop a game, and then they had to develop a game as their final assignment in the course as a group. And then we played those games and debriefed them. And the games were all around what I would call social justice, access to resources. And it was the games. I've done this 2 times now with 4 groups. So I've got 4 student developed games that are fascinating. I mean, they all took a different take on this, but all very meaningful and fun. You know, we had a good time playing them, and I'm pretty charged up about the method, and I think the game can be adapted to other content as well. Like, for teacher education, I'm going to adapt the content so they have to answer questions about curriculum, assessment, and instruction around, but the whole content could even be stripped out and maybe do more of what Tony was referring to in this blanket exercise, which is the whole point of it is understanding and developing empathy.
Mm.
So I'm willing to share this, willing to invite all of you in to Second Life to kind of see what this setup looks like and walk you through it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to, I'm actually meeting with a colleague later today who is teaching in an online teacher ed program that wants to try this out with her students because she will never see her students face to face and they're using Zoom as kind of the primary synchronous tool. But she said she was having difficulty imagining how she was going to be doing some group exercises and especially in an inclusion course. And I said, well, hey, why don't we try this out? And so she's interested. So I'm going to walk her through it this afternoon. And if she says, yeah, I'd like to try it, that maybe you all could kind of join as kind of participant observers when we actually get to that. It might be later in the spring.
I would definitely like that, Scott. I'd like to see that. Reminds me too of a friend of mine who works at another university. She's the curator there at the gallery on campus, and maybe I'll ask her because I can't quite remember the details. But she curated a show, basically more or less on sort of empathy. Just a couple of years ago. And there was a video game that she demoed, and no one won in this video game. And it was basically, if I remember correctly, about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And so maybe just out of curiosity, I'll ask if she can remind me about that, and maybe I can also share that just so you can see it.
Yeah.
I can see this going lots of different directions. That's not a bad thing. In my head, when I first thought of our meeting, I was thinking, oh, we can talk about empathy in the classroom and maybe do sort of some surveys and deploy those in all of our classes. And then maybe we could do some interviews and et cetera. But this is, that was just, in my head in terms of, but I can see lots of possibilities here in terms of where we go. And developing what you're describing could be really quite interesting. I could still follow that up, or others could too, with some kind of questionnaire at the end of the term or when the course is done about how well it worked, to give us some actual data. Okay, good.
I've been doing a lot of work in the literature on this now because I'm fascinated with game development and what's now being called gameful design, which is kind of a term that's being used instead of gamification, because in the literature, gamification is also used by marketing people to essentially manipulate and exploit people to make choices, based on bells and whistles. And so the more serious game developers who are trying to make a difference, serious games in people's lives, are moving now to the term called gameful design, which is what are the elements of successful games, especially video games, but can be others, that are engaging and immersive for people, and how can those be used successfully by educators? And it's a really fascinating body of literature, and I'm guessing, Rhonda, you've looked some of it yourself into this, and I think there's all kinds of aspects for even what we do in a quote typical lecture discussion classroom. The whole react to the past movement now that's going on in history and some of the other disciplines, which is getting away from lecture discussion altogether and doing a semester-long or a half-semester-long simulation of a historical event, causing students to do a huge amount of preparation in order to carry out these simulations to either confirm or alter history. And there's high impact because students are so invested in their learning because they want to do well, they want to win, they want to live these parts. And so I'm really fascinated with it, and I think there are a lot of cascading opportunities to learn, and again, I don't know if my game is necessarily the place to start, but it is somewhat created, and I'm welcome to share it.
Mm.
Triggering, yeah. Yes. And we have a very interesting institution. I won't go into it now, Tony, but it's got Quaker roots, but we're of kind of the evangelical Quakers, and which means that there's this whole influence from the evangelical community as well, which means we've got a real broad diversity of a student population here, some of whom are very much, I would say, traditional Quakers who are very inclusive, very open, very, very believing in kind of that respect and honor is due to all people. And then we've got more of this other community, which is, hey, we're going to start sorting and counting people. And there's a lot of tension on our campus about some of these issues about privilege and about helping people learn to get beyond it. So it's a great environment to be in for people who are concerned about these issues and wanting to make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
We're almost kind of at the end of our time, and I mean, I want to honor your time, and I also have other things to do today, but we can certainly schedule again soon. Why don't we just do final questions and comments?
Yeah, can I start?
Yep.
Yeah, I was hoping that we would get to see your game. Maybe not this afternoon because I have a class to teach, but somehow you can send us like whatever links and possibilities to have a look at it. And then, I mean, if we're really serious about moving forward in this, then I think this entire, we should sweep the literature and see what other games are out there, which focus on inclusion, and so that we have also a prep for our paper. I like the idea of a journal, but I would look at this more as an added, it's not a course, because then if we're going to access these professors or these teachers in doing other courses, then it would be something that they could do as part of our research subjects, right? So they would have to do this. It would have to be something that's short enough and sweet enough. But I really like this journal, because that would give us all this qualitative information and data. And then maybe, I don't know, a pre-test, post-test on the IRI, which would allow us both a quantitative analysis of how have they developed using this game, or whichever games we decide. That's how I would see it moving forward.
Okay, I'll quick response. I can provide some articles in our folder. I've got some that deal with especially games for empathy in particular, but Rhonda may have some on games for other purposes, inclusion, diversity, and Tony's already identified an exercise used in Canada. One approach we could think about doing here is kind of an autoethnographic approach that, we're kind of telling our own story about developing this and what our own thoughts and feelings are as maybe a first step then, and then spreading it out to a broader population. That's just a thought. Rhonda?
I could certainly share some literature on that, but again, my focus has been digital games, first of all, so video games, not necessarily the simulations, and empathy. So I have, part of my dissertation work is systematic literature review. So I'm currently going through 38 articles, 5 of which are dissertations themselves, that fall within the search parameters, but I can certainly share everything that came up before. I'm thinking that we do need to have some direction, and I know we're coming close on time, and I understand exactly what Denise is saying in terms of making it where it can work in different basically contexts, right? So it's not content specific. So I would imagine we're looking at teaching empathy through a game. There's quite a bit on that I can also share. I'm just wondering, what is our concrete next step? I was going to throw out the fact that if you have that game that is essentially a board game, the transition from the board game to a digital format is in and of itself an article, basically, how you do that, why you take certain elements that you're taking, what are the elements that are linked to empathy promotion, and how that translates in an online environment. I would also suggest that the game design document that goes along with that would be very helpful in terms of literature, again, that we can add to what already exists. I know quite a bit of the technical aspects only because I worked for an educational game design company for a year. They have close ties with our university too, so I'm still in contact with them. And that's what I would propose in terms of our next steps, looking at what you already have, Scott, and how that translates into the online forum, and specifically with that concentration of empathy. But I don't know what you all, what are we thinking basically for the next 6 steps?
Tony?
Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm thinking. I guess I still like the fact that we are coming together to do this. I think there's something here. There's a kernel of something for sure. I guess we have to think about how we want to focus this exactly. Do we want to do something that's sounds like something that's maybe more face to face, or do we want to do something that's online if we're looking at online environments? I mean, I think that's a question we might want to talk about or sort out. And then, are we thinking of teacher education? Are we thinking about developing empathy and compassion from students to other students? I know that's also come up. So I think we have to sort of sort out exactly what components we want to attach ourselves to, and then focus on a little bit more. But I guess it's because the thing is that I think there are lots of possibilities rather than none, which is a good thing, right? So I think we're in a rather a good position of saying, hey, we've got these things in common. We could go with various threads. It's just a matter of deciding which threads we want to follow. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I'll close off by saying I think, based on what I heard, I think maybe the low-hanging fruit, to kind of keep the ball rolling, is for me to dump into that Google folder some information about my game, both in the board format and how we're moving it into Second Life. And then I think we ought to put out an invitation to get another meeting together that, as part of that meeting, may also include either me doing a screencast of me walking through the village of Rockville so you can see what it looks like, or I can give you instructions all about having access to our pre-made avatars so you can actually, log in and be there and kind of walk through it with me, maybe giving you the choice, based on your comfort. Logging in and operating an avatar is not that difficult of a thing, but if you've never done that before, then it takes a little bit of don't run into that wall, don't fly off the edge of the deck type of a thing. But with just a little bit of coaching, you can do that. Can we do both? Yes, we could do both. So I'll share. I would suggest all 4 of you, or all 4 of us, any additional information you want to, or thoughts or whatever, dump into that Google Doc. I'll put out a call, should we say in about 3 weeks, to try to get back together again. That'll give me time to get some more information to you. We can create some folders for any articles or whatever. I've got a little video that kind of shows what the village online looks like. I can also give you the rules of the game and show you what the trading cards look like and all of that. And then maybe on the day that we agree to meet, we can have the option of going into Second Life as well. And maybe that will give us 3 weeks then to think about what is our next step. I think what I heard Rhonda say is even the development of this could potentially be an article, and even our own contributions and questions. You know, it doesn't have to be that we're all doing everything. There could be different angles here. And I do think faculty development is a good idea because it is something that translates across our institutions. If you ultimately want to have an impact on students, then you can kind of think of what the next steps would be in doing that. You know, it's like, well, do you follow instructors into their classrooms and do some coaching and training of them about how to take some of those elements and use them in their classroom? So again, you know, my bottom line is it's not just giving people information, it's helping them to have an experience that kind of changes their heart, you know, changes their worldview so that they want to take action. You know, it's like not because someone's making them to, it's because they want to. So does that sound good? All right, this is Tuesday morning at 7:30 my time, which is 11:30 Tony's time. That was maybe 9:30 Rhonda's time, and
10:30 my time.
Anyway, we're spread out across the continent, but it was a good time for me, and if this worked, why don't we try it again in about 3 weeks or so, and I'll put out an invite later today.
Thank you. That was amazing.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. It's good to see all of you again.
Thank you all. Y'all stay well. Tony.
Bye. Nice
Bye.
seeing you. Bye, Rhonda.
Denise,
Bye, Denise.
Take care. Ciao.
next time we're going to be in Zoom.
Yes, definitely. Next time I will look picture perfect. Okay.
Bye.
Bye.